I'd love to see the best that NASCAR have try and make the jump over to Formula One. And racing's racing, right? We love racing. Love Formula One? Great, come and give INDYCAR a go. You get Jeff Gordon racing in Formula One alongside Dario Franchitti. That would have broken F1 in America. That would have been huge. Boom.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What a race! California's Kevin Harvick does it. Straight making right there. You're the man.
Welcome to Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour, presented by Echo Park Automotive and NASCAR on Fox. And today, I'm really excited about having our guest, Will Buxton, on, part of our Fox IndyCar team. And Will, thanks for taking the time today to join me and talk a little racing.
Absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, well, tell me about your weekend. We saw a familiar face in Victory Lane again. Looks like a beautiful racetrack. I've actually never been there, but I heard your comments about it. Tell us about Barber this last weekend.
Oh, man. I've never been to Barber before. And actually, that's one of the most wonderful things about this year for me is pretty much every racetrack I'm getting to visit with IndyCar on Fox is going to be a new track for me. And everyone that I knew in racing said, wait till you get to Barber because it's going to blow you away. And it really did. It was like, I tried to compare it to places I'd been before, and it had elements of Mugello, elements of Brands Hatch, elements of Spa-Francorchamps, but it's like the most beautifully maintained circuit that you've ever seen in your life. They say it's the Augusta of motorsport, right? And it is. It's so beautifully maintained. Like the groundskeeping there is insane, and then the drivers will go and run off at turn one and ruin all that hard work. But it's just stunning. Visually, it's beautiful. To drive, it's a roller coaster. It's just corner after corner, undulating, off camber. It really takes you for a ride, and you've got to properly commit, be really aggressive. There are a bunch of blind crests, blind entries. It's maximum commitment. So great race, really fun, 90 laps, no cautions. I mean, we're now running 4 races into the season. We had a caution on lap 1 in St. Pete, and that's been it. So everyone's behaving themselves, which is not what I was expecting coming into the season.
Well, that's definitely abnormal for all of us goofballs that drive these cars. We typically lose our minds. So kudos to all your guys for keeping their heads on their shoulders. But you mentioned the road race background. Have you ever called an oval race?
No, I have rehearsal called the 500. So we went to LA before the season started, and Towns and Hinch and myself got in the booth just to have a little bit of back and forward and figure out how we were going to be in the booth. And they just threw races at us so we could rehearse, and we didn't know what they were going to throw at us. And one of them was, I think, like the last 50 laps of last year's 500. So that was the first time I'd ever called an oval. And it's a very different style of racing. Obviously, I've watched the 500 and I've watched IndyCar for years, but I've never actually called an oval race. And it's really intriguing how your brain has to switch, because you're not just paying attention necessarily to the battle that you're watching. You're maybe watching 2 groups, 3 groups behind to see somebody who's on the rise, watch how they're approaching it, how they're passing people, because they're very soon going to be in the mix for the next group or in the leading pack. And it's really having your wits about you and learning to read a race and in an entirely different way. So that's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. Thankfully, we have an entire week of practice for me to get my head around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before we actually roll into the 500 itself. And then there's all the emotion on top of that, of what is the biggest day in sport, the biggest one-day crowd of any sporting event on the planet. I know that in and of itself is going to be something unique, something I've never experienced before. And people are asking me, like, what's it going to be like? And I can't tell you. I'm either going to be a gibbering wreck because I'm going to be so overcome with emotion, or I'll be so excited you're going to have to scrape me off the ceiling. I'm so looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, on TV, I mean, you guys do a great job, and to have the magnitude of that event, for your first oval race, it's going to be fun to watch. You got a lot of experience in that truck that has a lot of experience with oval racing, so I think that you'll be well guided on that side. So, not having been to the oval yet, what has your biggest challenge been so far? Just coming over from all the F1 stuff over to the IndyCar side, did you follow IndyCar closely before you took on this task?
Yeah, I've always been an IndyCar fan my whole life. Going all the way back to early 1990s and Nigel Mansell coming across to the States. I was a big F1 fan back then, and obviously Mansell leaving as world champion in '92 to come over to the US to compete over here. They started carrying IndyCar pretty much for the first time that I can recall in my life as a regular thing on British television, and that got me hooked. And ever since then, I've been a huge fan. I've attended as many races as I've been able to over the past 25 years of doing motorsport professionally as a journalist and then as a commentator. And actually, way back in 2012, I was working for Speed Channel when they lost the rights to Formula One and it was going to NBC. And I didn't know if I'd have a job the next year. And I went out to a couple of IndyCar races later in the season, had some chats with Terry Ligner and with Randy Bernard, who was running IndyCar at the time. And I was actually trying back then to see if there was a way I could sort of transition over from F1 to IndyCar. It didn't work out then, and I kind of thought, well, that's my opportunity gone. But over the last couple of seasons, I'd really been thinking about trying to find a path out of Formula One to try and spread my wings a bit, take on something new, take on something that would really excite me. And towards the end of last year, the opportunity just to have a conversation with Fox opened up, and I took a call from Eric Shanks and Brad Zager, and within like 5 minutes, I was like, this is where I want to be. Their vision of what they wanted to do with and for IndyCar, my experience of what I'd done over the last decade with Liberty Media and helping to grow Formula One and take it from where it was still a huge sport internationally, but also very niche. And the goals that they set in terms of growing it, particularly in the United States, the ability to take all of those learnings and hopefully transpose those over to IndyCar, that really spoke to me. And then they said, how would you think about becoming lead announcer? And again, man, like I thought I was never going to get the opportunity to get back into the booth, back doing lead announcing, which I've not done for 10 years. And everything just packaged itself up into this perfect scenario. And I'm loving it. Like, I'm loving every single second of it. I feel 5-10 years younger. It is such a fun place to be. It is such a warm and open environment. It's such a community within that paddock and on that pit lane. I wish I'd made this move years ago. I'm having the best time.
What do you think we see what Fox has done. What does that do for IndyCar? We all know we all want to get bigger, right? We all want to spread our wings. As a sport, you want your sport to always grow. What does Fox mean to IndyCar right now as far as their growth and where that can go for the IndyCar garage and all the owners and everybody that's a part of it?
I think it's number one, it's the commitment. It's the passion that Eric Shanks shows for it. He's an Indiana boy. He loves his IndyCar, and I think he's always wanted to have the opportunity to show the United States how brilliant IndyCar is, to take it back to the glory days that IndyCar has had in so many different eras of its existence. It's the fact that for the first time, every single race is on network television. I mean, you can't overlook how important that is for any sport to have every single event on network television is absolutely huge. And that's something that IndyCar hasn't had before. So, it's absolutely massive. But as I say, it's the commitment, it's the investment, it's the passion that's being shown. And I think that, resonates back through the paddock of, well, we have a partner here in Fox who believes in the product, who believes in the championship, and who wants to take us back, to where we as a championship deserve to be. And that resonates through every team. It will resonate then from the teams to their sponsors, to their potential sponsors, to the drivers and their potential sponsors as well. So, and look, we're right at the start, and it's just the beginning. And I can't wait to see where we are in the conversation that we will have about this a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, and see, how this has grown. Is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. And I think people would be crazy just to assume that because Fox have picked it up, suddenly everything is going to double, treble, quadruple, the figures overnight. But obviously the long-term objective is to do exactly that. And I look at the figures that we used to have on NBC broadcasting Formula One, or on Speed Channel broadcasting Formula One, as little as 10 to 15 years ago. And that base level to where it is now, and the fact that, the viewership has quadrupled over the last decade, that came from a much lower starting point to what IndyCar has as a starting point. So if we can utilize the groundswell in public perception and public love of open wheel racing, and ride on the coattails of that to say, you love Formula One? Great, come and give IndyCar a go. You love racing, whatever form it might be, whether it's endurance racing, whether it's NASCAR, whether it's MotoGP, Formula E, doesn't matter, man. Racing's racing, right? We love racing. And if we can bring people over and say, there is enough room in your motorsport heart to not just follow one championship, but 2 or 3, come and give IndyCar a go. You're gonna love it, and then hopefully we utilize that as a springboard, and we continue to grow the series over the years.
Well, you talk about building a series, and I think I'm an F1 fan. Keelan and myself, we love to follow F1, and I think you're in a unique position to really find this balance between, or understand for those that aren't in it every day, to find the balance between IndyCar, F1, the differences, and I think you're a great person to ask some of these questions. And for me, I really got to know Formula One a lot different through Netflix.
Yeah.
How important is it to have something like that, for IndyCar and NASCAR? Tell us what that did, in your opinion, for F1 when that show came out.
That was absolutely huge, and I don't think you can overlook its importance. But I also think that it wasn't the sole driver. Liberty Media were very savvy and very smart when they came into Formula One, because they saw the product, they saw the potential that existed within it, but they also saw that it had really underutilized what at the time was a massive boom in social media. Bernie Ecclestone, when he'd run the sport, was very protective of the broadcast deals that he'd done, and rightly so. The broadcasters who'd invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in helping the sport to grow over decades. That's where his loyalty lay. And there was perhaps a lack of understanding in where the shift in media was moving. And so things like a YouTube channel or Twitter, X, whatever, Facebook, all of those things were off limits. Drivers couldn't post video of themselves in the paddocks or in the pit lane. Teams were restricted in what they could do. And the first thing that Liberty did was completely get rid of any of the restrictions that the teams and the drivers had in promoting themselves through social media. They then established an entire digital department within the sport that was then pushing out across social media channels and providing free content for people to watch, which was particularly important when the majority of Formula One viewership was held behind a paywall. How do you get new eyeballs if you have to pay to watch the sport in the first place? It's really, really hard. So social media became almost a teaser. You got like a 10-minute free view that would entice you towards paying, to go behind that paywall and watch the sport wherever it was being carried. And they really embraced that. Now, part of that again was, let's do a series for a streaming platform that highlights the sport and tells the stories of the sport. There was a perfect storm that existed around the creation of Drive to Survive. One of which was that Mercedes and Ferrari wanted nothing to do with the first season. And they were the teams who were competing for the championship that year. So Box to Box, who made the series and still do make the series, they had to focus in on personality and looking for stories beyond the simple battle for the championship. And that was one of the key strengths of what made Drive to Survive popular. It then fell and the series were released at a time when the world was locked down because COVID-19 hit, people were stuck at home, didn't know what to watch. All of a sudden, top 10, there's this Drive to Survive thing. So people tuned in and watched it and fell in love with the characters and the drivers and the team bosses. And Formula One somehow, throughout the pandemic, managed to create an entire season's worth of racing within, I think it was like a 4 or 5 month period at the end of the year, an international calendar. So you could watch Drive to Survive, and then you could watch these new heroes that you had racing pretty much every single weekend. So that perfect bubble, that perfect storm, you're never going to see that replicated for any sport and in any time, because hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't get locked down by a global pandemic again, and people aren't searching for this connection and this personal touch that they were lacking in their everyday lives. So yes, it was hugely important. Is it an absolute blueprint for every other sport in the world today? I don't believe it is, because I think the time is different. So if you want a series or you want a behind the scenes look, you almost have to take what Drive to Survive has done, but you have to do something different. You can't just rely on that same format and expect it to do the same thing, because the circumstances are kind of completely different.
Yeah. And I think when you look at those circumstances and, the way that you put all that together, and that's a great example of what happened during the pandemic. Our sport developed in ways that it never would have in normal conditions as well. And I think when you look across the board at motorsports in general, a lot of the very first sports that were able to go back were motorsports, and we built a lot of fans because of that and being able to get back to the racetrack. I think one of the other questions that I had that I felt like you would have a lot of insight on. So I spent a lot of time. We sent Keelan, my son, over to Italy to race in the WSK and a lot of the European karting ranks a couple of years ago. And there are a lot of politics towards American drivers on the teams and things that happen. But the question that I have is, when we look at IndyCar, do we need more American drivers? Do we need that American driver in F1? And the problem and the reason that I bring this up, the path that we had talked about for Keelan, if he was going to try to go down the F1 route, was nothing to do with the development systems that fall within the United States in F4, F3, F2. How do we fix that problem for American open wheel racing to be competitive enough to where our good American open wheel drivers don't have to go across the world to race?
It's a time-honored question, isn't it? And there's no simple solution to it, because if there was, we would have found it by now. Because this isn't new. This is, God, you can go back 30, 40, 50, 60. Like, how many American drivers have actually been able to transfer over and make a success of the European ladder? You have to go back to the 60s and Phil Hill, or the 70s and Mario. Dan Gurney, in the 60s as well. Other than that, who are you looking at? Because Michael Andretti tried it in the 90s, didn't really work. I remember watching guys like Robert Wickens and Alexander Rossi try to make it through, and obviously Alexander did get to Formula One, but as you say, if you want to get to Formula One, you have to do the European ladder. But as an American, how do you find the sponsorship to race in Europe when European sponsors aren't going to back an American, and an American sponsor is unlikely to back an American in a market that they're not in, because every race happens in Europe and the vast majority of the broadcasting of those championships is in Europe and not on American television. So you've either got to be really rich, really lucky, and find a backer who will support you through all of that, or find your way somehow onto a Formula One team's young driver program, which, as we know, you can get booted out of at any moment without a parachute, and then you're high and dry without a sponsor and stuck halfway up a ladder with no, with no more rungs on that ladder to get to the top of where you were aiming for. And even if you do make it to the top, like an Alexander Rossi, and you survive for half a season, a full season, however long, and then you get booted out and you want to come over to America, you're almost a black sheep then, because you're this pariah that pushed away the American ladder and said, I don't want anything to do with that. I want to focus on Europe. So then the American fan base is, well, who the hell are you? We've never heard about you because you've never done the American ladder. And your rivals, I guess, don't really respect you and think you're just doing this as, a backup plan because your highfalutin decision to try and make it to Formula One didn't work or only worked for a certain period of time. It's really hard. And I know how much Alexander struggled with it. And then he goes to the Indy 500 and wins on debut. And he said to me back then, like, that moment of crossing the line, and he was really lucky because when he ran out of fuel, he had an experience that nobody else, I think, in the history of the Indy 500 has ever had. You win on debut in front of 350,000 people, and you don't have an engine note behind you. It's silence. So all he heard was 350,000 people erupting. And he said that was the moment when he got it. Like he suddenly understood all of it. Imagine having that experience. It's incredible. But that doesn't really answer the question, does it? Because I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it if you want to be an American kid and make it to Formula One.
So what? Let me ask you this then.
Again, it's an interesting question.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then. So what does the Cadillac F1 team do? Do they take the best IndyCar driver? Do they take what do they do? Because the best two kids that have come out of American karting that have been in the European system lately are now in the NASCAR system, Brent Cruz and Connor Zilisch. And, that was a big miss for open wheel racing to continue those guys all the way up through what they did through karting, successful in the European ranks, and then they never make it to the IndyCar ranks. So, from the Cadillac F1 side, I mean, who do they put in their cars?
It's a fascinating one, isn't it? I mean, last time I thought we really had a chance of somebody transitioning over was when Joseph Newgarden was winning championships in IndyCar, because there was the connection through Shell to Ferrari. And so you kind of think, well, maybe this Penske hook up with Shell and the link to Ferrari, maybe there's a chance that he could move to a Ferrari. Because really, if you want an American driver to succeed, they've got to be with a top team. You can't just put them in, a backmarker team and expect that to resonate with people, because them finishing 18th, 19th every weekend, that's not marketable. And that's not a positive news story. Having an American driver in Formula One for the sake of it doesn't help Formula One in America, definitely doesn't have the perception of American drivers in Europe. So why would you do it? That's why I was really glad Colton Herta ultimately didn't get his license to go and race with AlphaTauri a couple of years ago, because that car was a dog and he just would have looked like an idiot. And then your great hope from IndyCar comes to Formula One, because he's in a terrible car, the results don't stack up. And so then IndyCar itself looks worse because the best that they could offer is finishing 18th, 19th through no fault of his own, just because of the equipment at his disposal. And that's a really important point to remember in all this. Formula One is ostensibly a technological battle. It is a battle of innovation and of engineering. If you are Max Verstappen and you're in a Sauber, you're not winning races. Right. But if you're Nico Hülkenberg and you leave Sauber and you're in a Red Bull, you've got a chance of winning races. So the Cadillac equation, it's very, very easy to say, let's take a Colton Herta if he's got the super license points. Let's take a Kyle Kirkwood if he's got the super license points. But are Cadillac going to be fighting for wins, podiums, top tens in their first season? They're going to be hoping to, but is that realistic? Arguably not. So if you take a Colton Herta and you put him straight into that Cadillac, and the Cadillac is qualifying 21st, 22nd with a Sergio Perez or a Valtteri Bottas or whoever an experienced race-winning driver from Formula One you put in it is, your great hope from IndyCar is not going to be doing any better than that. And you single-handedly, again, demolish the impression that an American driver could make because they're in the wrong car at the wrong time. And that's the fear. And I think, and I hope that Dan Towers, the guys at TWG, they love Colton, right? You know, Gamebridge, his major backer, have been for years. I don't think they would risk his career by rushing him into a team before it's ready to compete at the top.
Yeah. Well, it's a you know, when you mention the license and the super license and everything and the way that it's all structured.
On that, man. Like,
yeah.
I could go for weeks on the stupidity of that.
Yeah, it is definitely stupid. I'm glad you used that word because it is a very dumb process.
How can you give more super license points to kids out of F3 and F2 than a driver who finishes second or third in IndyCar, or the fact that you can't take a NASCAR champion and chuck them into a Formula One car immediately? Like, I understand why they did it, but it's proven to be so restrictive in terms of allowing people to make a crossover, whether it was just for a race or for an entire season. I'd love to see the best that NASCAR have try and make the jump over to Formula One. I'd love to see, you know, someone like a Kyle Larson not just attempt the Indy 500, but, you know, go and attempt the Monaco Grand Prix or whatever. I'd love to see kids from IndyCar transition over to Formula One, or from endurance racing or Formula E, wherever it might be. I hate the fact that we have such a restrictive licensing system in place at Formula One that it stops the possibility of transitioning, because that, I mean, as race fans, like, we're race fans, right? That's all we want to see is people trying different. You look at Scotty Mack coming over from, you know, supercars over in Australia and moving over into IndyCar and immediately being this guy that everyone had a target on because he was just so impressive. You know, you look at Kyle doing brilliant things with qualifying in the Indy 500 last year. That's what you want to see.
Well, I think it's definitely, it's a piece of the puzzle that is broken in the open wheel system to be able to get where you need to be from a super license standpoint in this country, to have a realistic opportunity to have the Colton Hertas or the, you know, Kyle Larson's probably not realistic, you know, with the way that his path has gone. But, you know, there has to be a better path in this country, because you know, you'd have to spend your whole life you know, over in Europe just to get the kids prepared. But let me ask you. I
was going to say, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a plan, and I only learned about it recently when I was researching for a book I wrote a few years ago, and I interviewed Jeff Gordon, and I interviewed Dario Franchitti, and it turned out that, you know, and this was before the stupid super license rules came in with you got to have a set number of points depending on what championship you're in. You know, Jeff was going to come over to Team Cool Green in IndyCar and run a season or two in IndyCar. And Dario was going to go over to BAR in Formula One. And the long-term plan was that the lineup for BAR in Formula One was going to be Jeff and Dario. And he was going to do a couple of seasons in IndyCar to train himself up. Imagine, right, now that would have been box office. And that would have broken F1 in America 20 years, 30 years before it finally broke through Drive to Survive. You get Jeff Gordon racing in Formula One alongside Dario Franchitti, these two great all-time champions out of American open wheel and out of stock car racing, and they're racing as teammates in Formula One. Boom, job done. Yeah. You know, that would have been huge.
And you know, I think when you look at a Kyle Larson, I mean, he's a once in a generation type driver. I mean, he can go. You may disagree or agree, but I mean, he could go to the Indy 500 and win this year. I truly believe that with his experience, he can go there and win. I think that he could go to an Indy car or to an F1 car with the proper situation and time in the car and be competitive. You put him in Max Verstappen's car, and he's going to do Max Verstappen things with the proper amount of time, you know, to lead up there. And you know, you look at a Connor Zilic, and if he had an American path to get to that, and now you have an American team. But I mean, I look at a kid like Lucas Palacio that's already in the Williams system, and he's 11 years old, and now probably arguably our best young karting kid, one of the best that is going to have a chance to do that, is already in the Europe. He's already in the European karting system and on his way there. So it's an interesting problem that we need to figure out a solution to get.
You look at someone like Logan Sargent, right? And Logan through junior formula stacked up really well. He almost beat Oscar Piastri to the F3 title. And Oscar Piastri is probably going to be Formula One world champion this year. But he very nearly wasn't Formula 3 champion because Logan was like that close, a couple of points away from beating him. And I think if he hadn't been taken out at the last race, Logan probably would have won the title that year. So this kid who very nearly beat the guy who we all think will be Formula One world champion this year does make his way to Formula One, but doesn't find himself in the right seat at the right time. Pressure bears down on him, mistakes start to creep in, and all of a sudden he's out on his ear. And, this season has decided just to step away from racing completely. It's a flip of a coin, man. Even if you do dedicate your life to taking that path, it's so tough.
Yeah, it is so tough. But we'll get off of the that subject. But I could talk to you about that stuff all day. It's a really interesting dynamic in the racing world. But a couple more questions. What's the best race you've ever watched in person?
I think just for being in the moment and being caught up with the emotion of it and how it played out when Hamilton won the championship in Brazil in 2008, when he finished fifth, took the position on the last corner of the last lap. Being in that media center when half of it erupted as Massa crossed the line and was world champion, and then Lewis takes the position and crosses the line and then he's world champion. Being in that, the rain's pouring down outside, it's dark, and then Felipe's banging his chest on the podium. That was incredible to be there, to be a part of that. That was pretty amazing. Best win I've ever seen was Robert Wickens in GP3 when he stayed out on slick tires at Spa and everyone else was on wets. And Robert realized that there was no way he could win this thing because everyone was going to pass him when the pace car pulled in at the end of the caution period. So he just wound the clock down and didn't cross the start finish line until the clock had run down to zero. And won the race.
Unreal.
I was like, that was just genius.
Unreal.
That's brilliant.
Worst interview you've ever done?
Oh, Nico Rosberg. Owen Wilson, the actor. Like, I had to interview him on a grid walk once, and he was, I'm not going to use the word in polite company. But yeah, Nico was difficult. Could be difficult. When you got him on a good day, he was good. And you get him on a bad day, he was absolutely appalling. Jody Scheckter was notoriously tough back in the day. He's eased a bit more recently.
That's great. All right, last question. First car you ever owned?
Oh, did I ever own myself? So my first ever car was an Austin Metro. I loved that little car. Crashed it after about 3 months, completely wrote it off because I thought I was a rally driver and I wasn't. But I think the first car I bought for myself, like actually properly bought for myself, was a Volvo C30R. So yeah, I don't have a great history with cars.
So you recommend?
And it's the best.
So you don't have a great history with cars because you wreck them or they're boring? Which one?
No, I've just not bought anything interesting. My Land Rover Defender is probably the best purchase I've made from a car perspective. I absolutely love it. I'm waiting until I have enough in the bank that I can buy a little classic car. I want a little Morgan or an MGA twin cam or something like that. And hopefully one day I'll move to LA and I'll just drive around in an MGA all day. That's the dream.
There you go. Well, Will, I enjoy your work. I love listening to you talk about racing. It's quite an honor to listen to somebody that is as knowledgeable about so many different forms of racing as you are. I hope that we can continue these conversations somewhere else down the line, but keep it going on IndyCar with our group from Fox. And thanks for taking the time today. Good luck with that first oval race. It's just, it's just a good warm-up race. I'm sure nobody will be watching. You'll be fine.
Yeah, that's it. No pressure. Just take it easy. It's going to be fine.
All right, man. Have a great day. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.